Silence of the Lambs is way more than just a movie. It's a cornerstone in cinematic history. I mean, it's been decades, and yet it rules as the first horror thriller film to win an Academy Award for the Best Picture. And I'll forever take a bow to Anthony Hopkins for bringing Hannibal Lecter to life. Interestingly, the character was thriving in pages of novels by Thomas Harris. In fact, after the 1991 movie, Hannibal Lecter led quite a life in the following novels and movies. And that's what I'm here for today, to tell you everything about the man who can still make our skin crawl.
Hannibal Lecter started his journey back in 1981 in Thomas Harris's book, Red Dragon. This is where we first learn about the existence of a brilliant psychiatrist who, happened to like the taste of human flesh. According to the events of this book, Lecter has already been apprehended, and when a new serial killer called Tooth Fairy terrorized people across the United States, the authorities sought his help. Soon, this story was adapted into the movie Manhunter of 1986 and Red Dragon of 2002. However, the infamous recognition of Lecter started with Silence of the Lambs, and it pushed Thomas to keep telling his story. Now, to be clear, I'll be drawing from all 4 books by Harris, the related movies, and the television show in this video, to walk you all through the entire life of Hannibal Lecter. Who was Hannibal Lecter? Hannibal was born in an ancient castle in Vilnius, Lithuania in 1933. Of course, you caught on to the word of the castle, and yes, the Lecter family were aristocrats. His father, Count Lecter, was apparently a descendant of a warlord, Hannibal the Grim, who was known for defeating the Teutonic Order at the Battle of Grunwald in 1410. Hey, I promise this is not a boring history class. It'll be more fun, just hang on. Lecter's mother, Madame Simonetta Sforza Lecter, too hailed from wealthy families, namely the Visconti and Sforza families, who ruled Milan for about 250 years. Hannibal Lecter was a product of this bloodline, and it kinda explains how he was shaped by the dark histories of his ancestors. However, he could have belonged to a different lineage, one that's actually even worse. He himself went on to search the records of the Capone Library to determine whether he descended from the ruthless 12th century figure Giuliano Bevisangue. It's unclear whether he did, but if it's any consolation, Bevisangue roughly translates to blood drinker, and could have given a lot more context to Lecter carrying the seeds of cannibalism. Coming to his childhood, it wasn't exactly rosy. Hannibal did receive good quality education in German, English, and Lithuanian history under his father's supervision. On the brighter side, he was always a curious kid. Hannibal found an old edition of Euclid's Elements when he was 6, and used the hand-drawn pictures to understand the height of the castle towers. Soon, he got an adorable baby sister, Misha, and went on to form a strong bond with her. However, things collapsed in the winter of 1941, and Lecter's happy days were about to become history. In 1941, as Operation Barbarossa brought German forces into Soviet-occupied Lithuania, the war soon reached the Lecter estate. The Lecter family had to flee when Hannibal was just 8 years old. They lived in a lodge in the forest for a couple of years, but that too was bombed by a German Stuka when a Soviet tank stopped at Lecter's family lodge to get some water. A group of deserters led by Vladis Grudas appeared to loot the lodge and found Hannibal and Misha, who were the only survivors in that explosion. They were held captive while Grudas and his men looted the lodge, and that was followed by them killing and making a feast out of Misha. Hannibal managed to escape, but understandably, he was scarred for life. His sister was killed and eaten in front of him. If he wasn't supposed to grow up a cannibal, I don't know who was. Lecter wandered around the forest for some time with nothing but a shackle around his neck and his dad's binoculars. Thankfully, a group of Soviet soldiers found him and took him back to his old home, the castle, which was turned into an orphanage by the Russians. Lecter's life in the orphanage. Probably not the right emotion, but I feel bad for Hannibal. It's one thing to lose your family and see your home converted into a children's shelter. It's another to be bullied right there where you were once surrounded by love. The war had affected many kids' psyche, and a lot of them had become bullies. When he was brought back, Lecter had already suffered from dehydration, hypothermia, and even the bruises on his neck from carrying the shackle were infected. The incidents rendered him mute, which led other kids to bully him mercilessly, and also insult him for an extra sixth finger on his left hand. Hannibal digested everything because he was too tired and shaken to pick a fight. However, when he saw the younger orphans being bullied, he lost it. His young mind failed to distinguish between these orphan bullies and Brutus, causing him to brutally attack and injure them. Hannibal would never really get over his sister's gruesome death, and whenever he had the chance, he behaved himself around the younger ones, letting them tease him or even handing them treats that he barely got. His fraternal instinct was too strong to just vanish in a day. In fact, his life in that orphanage marked the particular code of crime he followed while choosing his victims. Hannibal got adopted. After his 13th birthday, Hannibal discovered that he still had some living relatives when his uncle, Count Robert Lecter, arrived at the orphanage to adopt him. He still hasn't spoken, by the way. Robert brought him back to his estate on the banks of the river Essonne in France. Fortunately, Hannibal's aunt and uncle were much better than Harry Potter's, and they actually took care of him. Robert encouraged him to start painting as a way to deal with his distress, and his aunt, Lady Murasaki, taught him about Japanese culture. Hannibal formed a deep bond with his aunt and loved her dearly. However, he still could not forget what happened to his family, and to help him, they took him to a psychiatrist, Dr. Ruffin. Meanwhile, Hannibal showed his first signs of cannibalism. The local butcher named Paul Momont hurled some vulgar insults toward his aunt. Paul was a bully in Hannibal's eyes, and he attacked him, leading to a chaotic confrontation, and was believed to be partly responsible for causing Robert's fatal heart attack. Guilty and grief-stricken, Hannibal followed Paul and butchered him with one of Lady Murasaki's samurai swords. And there he was, Hannibal Lecter, the murderer. In no time, he would turn into a cannibal too. After slaughtering Paul, Hannibal cut his cheeks, cooked them with mushrooms, and ate them. The murder drew the attention of a local inspector, Pascal Popil, who intuitively caught Hannibal, but couldn't prove him to be the murderer since he managed to pass a lie detector test. Lady Murasaki now wanted to leave the place after all the bad memories, and the two shifted into a flat in Paris. Popil, however, was fascinated by Hannibal and kept a close eye on him. The rise of Hannibal Lecter as a killer and cannibal. Hannibal was an exceptionally bright kid, and it landed him a spot in an esteemed boarding school, Lice. Hannibal focused on medicine and graduated early, becoming the youngest person to do so in the school's history. He then attended a medical school in France and was mentored by Dr. Dumas, and even received a diploma in record time. In the meantime, he learned something that changed his life. See, as of yet, Hannibal wasn't a fully grown killer, but life made him so. He learned that the man who held him prisoner was still alive when he found a painting on sale in a Paris gallery. Here's the catch. The painting was looted from his father's collection. This kind of provoked him to return to Lithuania and face his wounds again. Hannibal went back to the scene of his sister's murder in the early 1950s, when Hannibal was around 18. He excavated the ruins of the place where his family died. Upon finding Misha's remains, he gave her a proper burial. You'd think this would put an end to his pain and the warped mindset with which he grew up, but nope. The result was rather the opposite. Hannibal managed to find one member of the group, Enrikus Dortlik, who was responsible for killing his sister and was now an officer in the Soviet border guards. Lecter was not thrown off guard. Instead, he murdered Dortlik in cold blood and, of course, consumed his cheeks. He was now growing a taste for it. Naturally, the similarities in the crime put Lecter back on Popil's radar. On the other hand, Brutus, who realized that it was indeed Hannibal, dispatched another member of the same group, Zygmus Milko, to bribe Lecter or kill him and put an end to the story. Oh, Brutus. He was not the little scared boy anymore. Hannibal ended up killing Miklo, and that too horribly, by drowning him in formaldehyde. Both his aunt and Popil tried to stop Lecter, but by now he was a seasoned killer and a cannibal. He started losing his shit day by day and began developing romantic feelings for Lady Murasaki. During a confrontation, it was heavily suggested that there was sexual tension between the two, and Brutus took advantage of this. He kidnapped Lady Murasaki to lure in Lecter to his death. He was not afraid. He took the samurai sword from his first kill and tracked down Brutus's boathouse. However, what Brutus would reveal changed Lecter's life forever. The man finally spilled the truth that Hannibal too had eaten his sister's flesh in a broth that was fed to him by the soldiers. Obviously, Brutus met a terrible death, with Lecter repeatedly carving Misha's initials on his body. Lady Murasaki now had enough and was utterly afraid of who Lecter had become. He fled from her and went into hiding, even though he claimed that he loved her. The entire incident turned Hannibal into a crazed killer, who now also had to deal with his complicated feelings for his aunt. Popeil now had enough reason to arrest Lecter. Still, there was no conclusive evidence against him, and his victim's association with the Nazis actually became something of a celebration in France, with students and communists rallying for his release. Before he was freed, Lady Murasaki visited him one last time, and when she looked at Hannibal, there was nothing, no sort of emotion whatsoever. He was a blank wall. Finally, references from Dr. Dumas and the head of the police forensic laboratory for when Hannibal worked as a volunteer led to his prompt release. He then left for Baltimore for an internship, only after killing the last member of the gang, Braunis Grintz. We might chill with a cocktail on the beach during vacations, but Hannibal killed for pleasure. Yes, he slain Grintz while vacationing in Montreal like it was on his itinerary. Hannibal's Baltimore years. So how did Lecter manage to get the internship I mentioned earlier? Well, thanks to Dr. Dumas again. Hannibal would sketch post-autopsy bodies for the medical examiner, which secured him a spot in the Johns Hopkins Medical Center in Baltimore that would ultimately turn into his university for postgraduate studies. He received a degree in medicine and settled as a psychiatrist in Baltimore. It was only a matter of time till Lecter would sweep everyone off with his sheer genius. Hannibal Lecter had become a prominent personality in Baltimore society, and his indulgence and extravagance made him the talk of the town. Now, Hannibal was a brilliant doctor, but that did not make him an ethical one. He would often manipulate his patients in a way that they would leave him large sums of money in their will. Nevertheless, Hannibal was unstoppable. He became globally known for being one of the best clinical psychiatrists and was even a patron and a board member of the Baltimore Philharmonic Orchestra. He would throw lavish parties and feed his guests pieces of his victims' flesh without their knowledge. However, Hannibal had nothing but disdain for psychology. He wouldn't even acknowledge it as a science and even mocked the way serial killers were profiled. Yet, he did not provide any alternative, and FBI agent Jack Crawford believed that Hannibal actually liked seeking wreckage. He intentionally did not treat some of his more violent patients simply because he wanted to see them engaging in aggressive acts just for fun. Lecter was also extremely methodical and cunning. He had a cottage with a fake passport and money, anticipating that he might be a fugitive any day. Hannibal Lecter as the Chesapeake Ripper. Hannibal Lecter was a thriving serial killer in America during the late 60s and early 70s, who played master chef with his victims' body parts. During his killing spree, Lecter was known to have killed and consumed at least 9 people and reportedly attempted to kill 3 more. Most of his victims were his patients. See, Lecter was a high-profile doctor, and naturally his patients, too, were millionaires and elite big shots. One of them, Mason Verger, was a convicted pedophile and sexual abuser who was being treated by Lecter. Interestingly, another of his clients was Mason's sister, Margot, who revealed that Mason had physically abused her, and in the TV show, it was revealed that he surgically removed her uterus so she would never be able to have babies. You see where this is going, right? The brother-sister dynamic was Hannibal's soft spot, and Margot poked it. Lecter knew he would be serving the most gruesome death to Mason. One night, the latter invited him to his home in Owing Mills and showed Lecter 2 caged dogs who he intended to starve and turn against each other. Lecter did not lose his cool. He calmly offered Mason a recreational drug which, in reality, was a hallucinogen, making him susceptible to any suggestion. Hannibal then told Mason to cut off his own face with a mirror shard, and when he did so, Lecter fed it to the dogs except the nose. he kept that for himself. He then severely injured Mason and left him to die. Unfortunate for both him and Mason, he survived as a hideously disfigured and paralyzed man, confined to a life support machine. When the dog's stomach was pumped, Mason's lips and parts of his forehead were discovered. You know, with Mason, you'd still think the bastard got what he deserved, but Lecter's next victim will scare you to death, and probably make you cancel your next therapy session. I know I did. Okay, get ready. Benjamin Raspail, who was, in all probability, Lecter's ninth and final known victim in the Chesapeake series, was no pervert or abuser. He was a flautist in the Baltimore Philharmonic Orchestra, whose only mistake was not being good enough. Lecter found his lack of talent a reason to spoil the orchestra's concerts, and he also disliked him for being nagging during their appointments. So he killed him. Yeah, it was that simple. And guess what? The man thought he did a favor by saving the world from Raspail's bad music. It's thus often believed that Lecter served his organs at a dinner party to the rest of the orchestra's members and board of directors. Whatever was left of Raspail's body was discovered on a church bench with his pancreas and thymus missing and his heart pierced. One small note about Raspail: he was the former lover of James Gump, who would later come back in Lecter's life as the Buffalo Bill serial killer. We've been spared the horror of knowing exactly what he did to his other prey, but it can be deduced that he manipulated and ate them in most cases, justifying it either as a public service or eating the rude. On one hand, Lecter was committing these heinous crimes, and on the other, he was helping Detective Will Graham with the Chesapeake Ripper case when the former reached out to him when one of the victims was identified as his patient. These were his own murders. Boy, he was two-timing on a different level. However, the truth did not stay hidden for long, and Graham figured it was Lecter who was the serial killer, which left a violent confrontation between the two before Hannibal Lecter was finally caught. Lecter's prison years. The authorities knew that Hannibal wouldn't break easily, so they gave him sodium amytal, hoping it would make him let his guard down and confess where he buried the student. However, they still underestimated him. Hannibal knew a day like this might come, so he trained himself by administering hypnotic drugs in case it was used on him to get the details of his crimes. And bingo, he was impenetrable. All he said in his drugged state was about a potato chip dip recipe. No, he wasn't blabbering. He was giving the FBI breadcrumbs about the student who might have been in that dip. Still, his involvement in the student's case remained a mystery. Lecter committed his last 3 crimes in a matter of 9 days. Yeah, you heard that right. Not even a fortnight, just 9 days. Apparently, an officer was so traumatized upon seeing his basement that he retired. Over time, photographs of Lecter's crimes spread all across the globe and gained a macabre following. Now, there was an interesting implication by Harris in the novel Hannibal. It hinted that Hannibal was the same serial killer who wreaked havoc in Florence and was known as Il Monstro di Firenze. However, Il Monstro killed from the 80s to the 90s, and Lecter was in prison from 1975 to 1983. That means Lecter was now inspiring other killers, and soon the world would see a lot more Hannibal Lecters than just the man behind bars. On that note, let's find out how Graham actually realized that Hannibal was the serial killer in Baltimore. When he first questioned Hannibal, he seemed like a really cool guy and was rather polite and just claimed that he didn't remember anything of significance about his former patients, aka the murder victim. Graham had a hunch, but let it go till Raspail's murder happened. He decided to interrogate Lecter again, and this time, he noticed some antique medical books in Lecter's office and instantly connected the dots. Turns out, Lecter's 6th victim was killed in his workshop and laced to a pegboard, much like the wound man, an illustration Graham used in early medical texts. He then confirmed his intuitions a little more and then called the police. But Lecter was one sneaky son of a biscuit who crept up on Graham from behind and mortally stabbed him. Thank heavens, Graham survived and Lecter was finally apprehended by FBI agents. Witnessing Lecter like that shook Graham. The poor man had to commit to a mental institution for some time, and upon recovering, he gave up the job. The next uphill task was analyzing Lecter. Police and psychiatrists tried their best, but they were dealing with a pro. He intentionally made up facts about himself, like his sadistic tendencies towards animals as a child. They were actually lies, fabricated carefully to distract his analysis. Lecter was far too sophisticated for a psychoanalysis because he made sure to keep himself updated about all the developments in the field. Hannibal literally made a fool out of Dr. Chilton, who conducted 12 sessions to evaluate him. He knew exactly how the tests were done and could easily make up answers that would stamp him as not being psychologically disturbed. In fact, he folded Chilton's tests into origami to mock his futile attempts at profiling him. Having been misled by Lecter, Dr. Chilton diagnosed him with Ganser syndrome, also known as the syndrome of approximate answers. Lecter couldn't have been more amused. In turn, he managed to get enough information on Chilton to publish papers on him and publicly humiliate him. The courts later found Lecter insane and thus spared him the death penalty. Instead, he was sent to the Baltimore State Hospital for the Criminally Insane to serve 9 consecutive life terms under the supervision of Frederick Chilton. His EEG showed an extremely unusual pattern, and given his history, Dr. Chilton dubbed him as a pure sociopath, partly because he couldn't find the right term to categorize Lecter. Due to this, Lecter became quite an asset. He began showing utter contempt for medical practitioners and rejected a checkup. However, his fingerprints were taken, and the card containing his left hand's prints, the one with the extra finger, became a cult object which was sent around the world as a collectible after he escaped. We'll get to that. Meanwhile, the FBI exhumed the graves of 4 patients who died under Lecter's care, as well as 2 rich benefactors to investigate the cause of their deaths, but the results were inconclusive. Soon, the media began crowding to have a piece of the cake, and the tabloids were full of unauthorized photos of Graham in the hospital, while Lecter was making headlines as Hannibal the Cannibal. But medicine still could not come up with the right adjectives for this man. His phenomenal intellect and savage nature earned him the moniker of a monster. Hannibal Lecter in the asylum. For the first year, Lecter was a model patient in the asylum. He did not throw any tantrums, behaved well, and even engaged in therapy. However, his appetite for human meat got the better of him one day. On July 8th, 1976, Hannibal complained of a chest pain and had to be taken to the infirmary. As soon as his restraints were removed to perform an EEG, Lecter pounced on a nurse like a starving lion. He tore her eye out, dislocated her jaw, lethally wounded her, and finally bit and ate her tongue. And during all of this, his pulse never went above 85 beats per minute. While trying to confine Lecter again, he struggled with the guards, causing his shoulder to get dislocated. After this incident, his security was maximized. He was given a straitjacket with heavy shackles and a muzzle, and was transported only when strapped to a hand truck. Once his cell was cleaned, the orderlies would put Lecter on his bed with heavy clothing so he could exchange his handcuffs for meals. Even that couldn't satisfy the authorities, which is understandable. When you have someone like this in the vicinity, nothing can make you relax. Lecter's cell had 2 barriers. The first was a wall of standard bars, and the second was a nylon net. Whenever he had visitors, they were warned not to go near him or give him anything that could potentially be used as a tool for escape. Chilton would even show the photograph of the nurse to warn people. With Chilton, Lecter had a complicated relationship. It was marked by mutual contempt. Chilton's mediocrity and self-inflated importance as a psychiatrist offended Lecter, who would keep on insulting him. In retaliation, Chilton would use several petty punishments on him, like taking his books or toilet seat away. Lecter was so damn brilliant that he analyzed this form of punishment, and at the end of Red Dragon, he would claim that such penalties indicated how society suffered from the problem of using half measures, and that any rational community would kill a man like him or give him his books. The middle ground was useless and reeked of incompetence. Lecter, on the other hand, developed a cordial bond with Barney, and the two would discuss their life. Even when he was stuck in the asylum, Lecter grew extremely famous. He kept on writing and publishing articles and theories, and there was one which he wrote on surgical addiction. That, once again, gained him the recognition of being an exceptional psychiatrist. He was also a voracious reader, and critiqued others' articles, sometimes a bit too harshly. Lecter wouldn't go on trial till 1977 when he was deemed safe enough. The court then found him guilty of 9 counts of murder and sentenced him to life without any possibility of parole. At first, he was designated as prisoner B13290, which changed to prisoner B51608 over time. Lecter helping the FBI and escaping. The FBI approached Lecter for his help in 2 cases during his stay in the Baltimore State General Hospital. The first was his old foe, Will Graham, who, after coming out of his retirement in 1980, sought his insight on the Tooth Fairy case after hitting a dead end. He helped, but his hatred for Graham was way too much to just let go and give out free advice. After Graham left, he sent a coded letter to the killer to kill Graham and his family. Of course, Lecter's plan worked, and Doloride attacked him so badly that Graham ended up being permanently disfigured and spiraled into depression. And alcoholism came free with that. Following this, Hannibal Lecter was isolated for 5 years and had no contact with anyone except Chilton and Barney, until one fine day in February of 1983, when Clarice Starling walked through the doors and sat in front of his cell. Clarice was an FBI trainee sent by Jack Crawford to interview Lecter with a psychological questionnaire. She initially thought it was an assignment related to her studies, but eventually got entangled in the Buffalo Bill murders. See, I told you to remember that name. This serial killer was targeting women, skinning them, and dumping their bodies in rivers. Lecter saw right through Clarice's ploy of trying to get his insights on the case. However, he was immediately drawn to her and gave her subtle clues to help her reach the conclusion by herself. Lecter played a game of quid pro quo with Clarice, where he shared some info about Buffalo Bill to help the police build a psychological profile in exchange for Clarice's personal details. Buffalo Bill's last known victim was the daughter of Senator Ruth Martin, Catherine. Naturally, this turned it into a high-profile case, and the FBI was ready to do anything to catch this killer. When Chilton himself went to Lecter for help, he told him that in exchange for better living conditions, he would reveal Buffalo Bill's real name to Martin. And did they blunder? Lecter was immediately flown to Memphis, Tennessee, where he was held at the Shelby County Courthouse. Of course, the man was not about to give up his real name. He lied to Martin, but when Clarice visited him at his makeshift holding, he gave her some final clues that would lead to the capture of Buffalo Bill and save the woman he'd taken. He finally revealed how Buffalo Bill was the partner of Raspail and how he treated them both. What came next was a bloody AF escape by Lecter. See, he was planning for this for a long time, but there was no way he was getting it wrong this time. Even when he was under Barry's supervision, Lecter practiced making 2 keys out of paper clips left from visitors. When it came to the final moment, Lecter used his handcuff key to slip it off and killed 2 correction officers. This time, he was killing out of necessity, and understandably, they were even more gruesome. Lecter skinned an officer and used his face as a mask, wore his uniform and pretended to be his own victim so that he could be hurried away in an ambulance while the authorities still looked for him. I know being amazed is probably not the right emotion, but what on earth was this man's gray matter made out of? He went foolproof. Meanwhile, Clarice managed to get a hold of Buffalo Bill. Lecter killed the paramedics and a tourist, stole their identity, and fled, becoming one of the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives. After his escape, Hannibal called Clarice to assure her that he wouldn't be seeking her out and that the world was more interesting with her in it. Lecter then went to his college, where he had resources to start a new life. He ended up in the Bahamas, where Chilton happened to be vacationing. Lecter mentioned to Clarice that he would be having an old friend for dinner, and Dr. Frederick Chilton was never seen or heard from again. Hannibal Lecter on the run. In Brazil, Lecter went through some extensive plastic surgery on his face, except the nose because he was a little too attached to his extra sensitive sense of smell. However, he removed his 6th finger, and that was a good call actually. He then finally relocated to Florence and took on the pseudonym Dr. Fell. Lecter had no problems in winning over his new locals and also getting himself a new job as a museum curator. His name might have changed, but his mind and his charm? Never. On that note, his murderous rage, too, was all the same. He actually killed the previous museum curator and buried him in concrete to ensure that the position would be vacant and he could slide in. While in Florence, it is implied that he committed the murder of a viola player and a confirmed homicide of a police detective, Rinaldo Pazzi. Honestly, Pazzi had it coming. He was the investigating officer on the Il Monstro case and failed at that. However, when he identified Lecter 7 years after his escape from Memphis, Pazzi got carried away by the idea of redemption. He made a multi-million-dollar deal with Mason Verger to get the doctor alive, bribing him with the hope of avenging himself by feeding Lecter a group of specially trained boars. Oh boy, he was dealing with the Hannibal Lecter. Of course, Pazzi's plans backfired, and he found himself to be Lecter's prisoner. Lecter disemboweled and hung Pazzi, and even made a little dessert out of Verger's henchmen. Florence was no longer safe for him, so Hannibal returned to the United States. Lecter was now being hunted down by both Verger and Clarice, who had been demoted after a botched heist, and figured that recapturing Lecter was the only way to get her recognition back. However, Verger's minions managed to capture him first, and Clarice rescued him, hoping to hand him over to the authorities, but got shot down with 2 sedative-filled darts. Lecter then convinced Margot to kill her brother, took the fall for it, and carried Clarice away. And there began a sick relationship between Clarice and Lecter. He kept her completely aloof from the world, using various conditioning techniques in an attempt to systematically replace her memories and personality and make her believe that, wait for it, she was Misha. Holy crap. Lecter even abducted Starling's rival, Paul Krender, who was trying to defame her. He performed a craniotomy on a drugged Krender, made a meal out of his brain, and shared it with Starling as a final test for her. Yet, after all this ordeal, Lecter failed. Clarice was too strong mentally to be brainwashed and turn into his sister. Complicating matters was Lecter's sexual attraction to her. Starling refused to let her own identity go and seduced Lecter, resulting in the beginning of a twisted love story. The two then got romantically involved and vanished. They were last spotted in 1993 by Barney Matthews in Buenos Aires, Argentina. The last words from the author about them was something like this: both Clarice and Lecter were capable of murder at any time because Lecter's conditioning created a counterpart of himself in Starling. Hannibal Lecter in Brian Fuller's series. In 2013, showrunner Brian Fuller dropped a series about Hannibal Lecter, which drew heavily from Harris's books and the previous movies. However, Fuller incorporated some newer aspects in the narrative, making it an art house version of Lecter's life. Played by Mads Mikkelsen, Lecter was shown in his 40s with a background that portrayed him going to Florence as a young man and starting his killing spree there. Fuller decided to put on the real story of the monster of Florence and his 16 murders between 1968 and 1985, which resulted in an everlasting controversy since the real culprit was never caught. He also tweaked Lecter's relationship with Will Graham. Yeah, Lecter was still the Baltimore Police Department's on-call psychiatrist for profiling purposes, but he also happened to be a therapist to many from the department, including Graham himself. The two formed an intense, borderline homoerotic relationship. Lecter's martial arts training also got more footage in the television adaptation, and here, he often mimicked the killings of the murders the FBI was pursuing, increasing the body count. The 3-season series gave us a detailed but pretty disturbing insight into how Lecter gaslighted people and made them his food. In fact, he even framed Graham for a series of homicides he committed, and even convinced the man that he actually did it. Fuller also picked up characters that appeared marginally in Harris's books and gave them a proper story arc. We also saw Alan from Red Dragon, who was gender swapped to Dr. Alana Bloom, becoming an important person, torn between helping Will Graham and continually being manipulated by her boyfriend, who was none other than Hannibal. All these people helped Fuller in creating a multi-layered rendition of Hannibal Lecter. There were also a couple of new characters, like FBI agent Miriam Lass, who discovered Hannibal's identity, but suddenly disappeared before she could spill the truth. Turns out Hannibal kept her in his underground bunker. You know what my favorite part about this series was? Hannibal had a therapist of his own, Bedelia du Maurier. To be in those shoes is a different kind of horror. How did Lecter look, and how was his personality? On the surface, Lecter was a sleek and small man with maroon eyes, which reflected the light to give out a shade of red. He had small white teeth and dark hair, which was slicked back with a distinct V-shaped pointed hairline at the center of his forehead. His voice was said to have a slight metallic rasp to it, and due to his lengthy years in prison, Lecter's skin became pale. Despite his petite stature, he was deceptively strong. The man could lift a body easily. Lecter was a man of taste. He loved music, art, history, and definitely cooking. He could play piano very well and was quite an admirer of the Canadian pianist Glenn Gould, particularly his interpretations of the Goldberg variations. Lecter also seemed to believe in God's existence. He was himself a follower when he was young, but lost all faith after Misha's death. However, while confined, he would collect articles of catastrophes, fascinated by the idea that God could kill his devoted worshippers. I am pretty sure he was another Lobo for God and was banned from both heaven and hell. What was his modus operandi? Lecter's victims did not show marks of extreme suffering, probably because he tortured them with certain hormones that would affect the quality of their flesh. His primary motives for murder were often considered to be revenge, public service, inferiority to himself, or discourtesy. Also, Lecter never, ever let rudeness slide. It was especially heinous to him, and he even killed his cellmate using an intermediary for disrespecting Clarice. He also did not prefer guns, rather knives. Particularly the Spyderco Harpy knife was his choice of murder weapon, though there had been evidence that Lecter was skilled with a shotgun and crossbow. He was also known to attack with his teeth at times. Being an admirer of art, Lecter also served poetic justice to his victims. Also, he used all his culinary expertise while preparing a meal from his victims, either for himself or for guests. Alright guys, that's all for today. I need to go watch some puppy reels to sleep at night because a walk through Hannibal Lecter's psyche was way scarier than a horror movie. The man was unspeakably dangerous, yet so damn brilliant that you'd be conflicted as to what to make of him. And that's exactly where Harris delivered the most notorious and unforgettable character ever. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye!